What would you say to someone then who would say you're so uncompassionate? I didn't think about that person.
Yeah, and I understand that. I often think of my daughter in that regard, who was diagnosed prenatally with a debilitating disease, and all the doctors and geneticists told us we need to abort our daughter. And they did that because they thought, well, the compassionate thing here is you don't want your daughter to suffer. You don't want your family to suffer. You don't want, this pained life to come into the world. But I don't have that right.
Thanks for joining us for more Bible Answers. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Welcome back to Bible Answers with Pastor Mike. And Pastor Mike, with recent things that are happening in the news and questions obviously coming in about this, what does the Bible say in regards to euthanasia?
Euthanasia. I think it's good to define the word. Eu is the Greek root for good. Thanos is the word for death, good death. The concept of euthanasia is that there are some cases where it would be good to have this person die. This is a better option than living on. And the context of living on is usually because there's going to be great pain, there's going to be great indignity, something that is going to be worse if they live than if they die. So it would be good to accelerate death, or in this case, to cause death. Either you take your own life or you have someone take your life, which is usually how the discussion is being framed these days, like a physician-assisted suicide as another way to talk about euthanasia. This would be a good death because you're facing a terminal disease, a brain tumor, there's no hope for your recovery. So let's just end this so you don't go on suffering.
And we think clearly that the Bible won't allow that because sin and death are so closely associated. We're never going to say something like that is good in that sense.
No.
So,
yeah, sin and death. I mean, death is the enemy. Death is something that's something Christ came to defeat. Certainly something we don't participate in as a person who takes our life or takes the life of someone else who's innocent. In other words, I don't have the right to take a life because of a couple things. Number one, I believe that people, as the Bible teaches, are made in the image of God. There's a sanctity of life, and it is so sacred in God's economy that I need to recognize that I cannot take someone's life, and I can't even take my own life. I can't direct someone to take my life. That is in part because not only are we created in the image of God, but we're not autonomous directors of our own life. We are stewards of our lives. Our lives, if you will, are on loan from God. And I guess I could add a third thing. This life is not all there is. And I think that's helpful to kind of keep in view. This life is given to me for a time, and I will then be judged on how I manage this life. And I can't not only take someone else's life, that's murder. I can't take my own life, that's self-murder. I can't direct a physician to take my life. That is also, murder by proxy. I can't do those things because life is sacred. I don't have the right to take my own life. So, I recognize the immorality of it. I also sympathize with why people do it. Abimelech, engages in euthanasia. Saul does. The end of 1 Samuel takes his own life, wants his armor bearer to kill him. All of these things are because they're suffering. They're near death. They're afraid of the indignity of having someone come and torture them. So they take their own lives, or they direct someone to take their life. And I can sympathize with the pain, but the Bible would say that this is an immoral act and it can't be done. I don't have the right to take my own life.
What would you say to someone then who would say you're so uncompassionate? I didn't think about that person.
Yeah, and I understand that. I often think of my daughter in that regard, who was diagnosed prenatally with a debilitating disease, and all the doctors and geneticists told us we need to abort our daughter. And they did that because they thought, well, the compassionate thing here is you don't want your daughter to suffer. You don't want your family to suffer. You don't want, this pained life to come into the world. But I don't have that right. You see, my obligation is to obey what God has saddled us with as human beings, and that is we're dealing with the sanctity of human life. And so we have to then drive ourselves to what the Bible says is the solution, which is not to end someone's life or end my own life, but to look for the things, and I boiled it down to three things that I always keep in the front of my mind when I deal with these issues, and that is I have to remember that God says, even in the midst of physical pain, He will grant His grace to us. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, there's that picture of Paul suffering with his thorn in the flesh, and he asks for it to be removed. God says no, and the response is, "My grace is sufficient for you." There's an enablement that God gives us, which I think is provided for us in a lot of different ways. Two ways in particular, which is my second and third thing, and that is in medication. Proverbs talks about, you give wine to those who are perishing.
Right.
The idea of utilizing what we can in this world to alleviate as much pain as we can.
Mm-hmm.
We can't take the life. There's never a direction to take life,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always this direction to alleviate pain. So we want to do that as best we can.
Right.
And then lastly, that grace is provided through God enabling me to have courage.
Mm-hmm.
In Philippians chapter 1, Paul here is in prison. He's going to be probably, in his own mind, potentially tortured and killed by the Romans. And he says, I'm going to have sufficient courage, all courage, full courage, that I might be able to glorify God, whether by life or by death.
Mm-hmm.
It's that courage I'm interested in, that I'm asking God through his grace to give me as I face a debilitating disease or a terminal sickness or whatever it might be. I want God to allow me to have that, and I want to see that realized as a virtue of God's grace in my own life. So I pray for God's grace. I look to God's grace. I, in faith, trust that he'll give me that. I look to medicine to alleviate pain when I'm terminally ill or I'm sick or whatever it might be. And then I pray for courage to face it the way that I should, that I might glorify God no matter how difficult it gets.
And understanding then in this worldview, knowing our God is so great that he can even take painful moments like that and suffering like that and turn something really good out of it at that point.
And we should talk more about that maybe next time.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for providing that clarity. And again, if you have any questions, we'd love to help you out. So send them to us at askpastormike@compasschurch.org. We'd love to help you out.